The international headquarters of Virex Technologies had never looked so tense. Luxury cars lined the front entrance while reporters crowded behind metal barriers, waiting for a statement that could change the company's future forever. Inside the towering glass building, executives rushed through polished hallways with panic written across their faces. A billion-dollar partnership was hanging by a thread. Representatives from 8 countries had arrived for the most important negotiation in the company's history. The deal promised thousands of jobs, worldwide expansion, and enough profit to save the company from financial collapse. But one unexpected disaster had turned the conference room into a battlefield of embarrassment. The company's chief interpreter suddenly collapsed from exhaustion just minutes before the meeting started. At first, the executives thought replacing him would be easy. It was. One after another, 12 professional interpreters were called into the room. Some spoke only 3 languages. Others misunderstood critical phrases. One accidentally insulted a Japanese investor by mistranslating a formal greeting. Another confused a French financial term, causing angry whispers across the table. Every mistake pushed the investors closer to walking away. Richard Hale, the company's cold and demanding CEO, stood near the giant conference window with fury burning in his eyes. Sweat gathered beneath his expensive collar as board members stared at him with silent blame. "This deal cannot fail," Richard said sharply. "Do whatever it takes." But nobody had a solution. Outside the conference room, employees whispered nervously. "They're losing the deal. 12 interpreters already failed. If this partnership collapses, layoffs will start next month." Most workers feared for their jobs. But hidden among the frightened employees was a quiet cleaner named Elias. Every morning before sunrise, Elias pushed his cleaning cart through empty hallways while executives ignored him completely. He cleaned coffee stains from meeting tables, emptied trash bins overflowing with luxury food containers, and polished floors so perfectly that nobody noticed his work. To the company, he was invisible. People barely knew his name. Some executives called him janitor instead of Elias. Others acted as though he didn't exist at all. Yet every single night after the building emptied, Elias carried a small notebook in his pocket and listened carefully to international business recordings while he worked. English, Mandarin, Arabic. French, Spanish, Russian, Japanese, German, 8 languages. For years he practiced them silently while mopping floors. Nobody ever asked why. Nobody cared enough to know. As chaos spread through the office that afternoon, Elias quietly cleaned spilled coffee near the conference room entrance. Through the partially open door, he heard confused translators struggling again. An investor from Germany spoke. The interpreter froze. Another investor from Japan interrupted impatiently. The room became louder. Arguments exploded between executives. Richard slammed his hand against the table. "This is a disaster," the interpreter apologized nervously before walking out in humiliation. Silence filled the room. One investor checked his watch. Another began packing his documents. Then Elias softly spoke from the doorway. "I can help." Nobody reacted at first. A few executives turned toward him with confusion. Richard narrowed his eyes. "What?" Elias stood holding his cleaning cloth, looking small beneath the massive doorway. "I understand their languages," he said quietly. Several people laughed immediately. One executive shook his head. "This is not the time for jokes." Another muttered, "Security should keep staff away from this floor," but Elias didn't move. A Japanese investor suddenly spoke directly to him, fluent Japanese. Without hesitation, Elias answered perfectly. The entire room froze, then a French representative tested him. Again, flawless. Spanish followed, then Russian, Arabic, Mandarin. Every response came naturally. The room fell into stunned silence. Even Richard looked speechless. For the first time in years, every executive in the company truly looked at the quiet cleaner standing before them. Not as a janitor, not as invisible, as someone extraordinary. One investor slowly smiled. "Please," he said warmly, "take a seat." Elias hesitated. No executive had ever invited him to sit at that table. Richard reluctantly nodded. "Fine. Do it." Elias carefully placed his cleaning supplies against the wall and sat among people who once ignored him daily. The meeting resumed. This time everything changed. Elias translated complex financial discussions with calm precision. He adjusted formal expressions respectfully for each culture. He explained emotional tones, business customs, and hidden meanings behind delicate phrases. Tension slowly disappeared. Investors who looked ready to leave began smiling again. For nearly 3 hours, Elias carried the entire negotiation on his shoulders, and he never made a single mistake. Richard watched in disbelief. How could a cleaner possess skills greater than highly paid professionals? The answer quietly haunted him, because nobody had ever cared enough to ask who Elias truly was. As negotiations neared completion, a senior executive named Martin Cole stared at Elias with growing unease. Martin wasn't worried about the deal. He was worried about secrets. Years earlier, Martin secretly manipulated company finances through illegal overseas transactions. Those hidden documents involved multiple international accounts and foreign communications. Communications written in different languages Elias understood. Martin suddenly realized something terrifying. The invisible cleaner may have overheard far more than anyone imagined. When the final agreement was signed, applause filled the conference room. Relief spread across exhausted faces while reporters outside celebrated the company's survival. Richard approached Elias slowly. For years he had walked past this man without a second glance. Now that same man had saved the company. "You should have told someone about your abilities," Richard said. Elias gave a small smile. "I tried once," Richard frowned. "What happened?" Elias lowered his eyes. "Your office rejected my application before the interview." Silence hit harder than any insult. Richard suddenly remembered. Years ago, a multilingual applicant with an immigrant background applied for an administrative position. Human Resources dismissed him immediately after seeing his worn clothes and cleaning experience. That applicant was Elias. Before Richard could respond, Martin interrupted quickly. "We should celebrate later. Right now we need confidentiality." His voice sounded forced, nervous. Elias noticed, so did Richard. That evening, while employees celebrated downstairs, Elias quietly returned to cleaning empty offices. Nothing about him changed. He still pushed the same cart, still wore the same faded uniform. Still worked alone, but now whispers followed him everywhere. "That's the cleaner who saved the company. He speaks 8 languages. Why was he working as a janitor?" Most people suddenly treated him kindly, yet Elias noticed something painful. Before today, kindness never existed. Respect only appeared after people discovered his value. Late that night, while cleaning near the executive offices, Elias accidentally overheard an argument inside Martin's office. Martin was speaking urgently on the phone in Russian. "I told you the files were deleted." Pause. "No, the cleaner doesn't matter." Another pause, then Martin's voice turned fearful. "If the CEO finds out about the transfers, we're finished." Elias quietly stopped moving, his eyes narrowed. The company's crisis was far from over. Moments later, Martin opened the office door and froze when he saw Elias standing nearby. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Martin forced an uncomfortable smile. "Working late?" Elias nodded slowly. Martin stepped closer. "You heard nothing, correct?" Elias remained calm. "I only clean floors." Martin studied his face carefully, unsure whether to trust him. Then he walked away, but fear followed him down the hallway. Because for the first time, the most invisible man in the company had become the most dangerous witness. And deep inside the building, beneath polished floors and expensive offices, a silent war had just begun.